What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, January 31st, 2018, the last day of the month. We're through January now, getting into February as of tomorrow. So if you've got a significant other, it's time to start thinking seriously about Valentine's Day. And that's easy to do because the stuff is already in the stores. Just like the other holidays, they just get it in there as fast as they can and try and make as much money milking romance or anything else they can think of right now. We're under some heavy weather here in Hawaii, but there was a brief break in the clouds, and I was able to step out back and look at the blue moon, supermoon eclipse briefly last night. So I'm feeling very butch about that. Wasn't clear enough for me to get the camera out and take a picture, but I did see it through, like I said, a break in the clouds here. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to twiddle the dials, keep us out of trouble, and answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program reminder, tomorrow in our third hour, Greg Felton is an author, going to be talking with us about his new book. And yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be returning to hour number 3 on Friday here. So let's get into the news here. Very bizarre story. Following the State of the Union, the GOP typically goes on a retreat, which is where they just go off someplace private, away from the public, away from the press, to basically plan strategy, the agenda for this year, and of course how they're going to approach the November midterm elections. And for some reason, this chartered train hit a trash truck at a railroad crossing early this morning and left one person dead. Apparently there were 2 people in the trash truck. One of them was killed. The other one is injured and is in the hospital. No members of Congress were seriously injured. But it's very strange. And apparently CNN contributor Jonathan Tassini thinks this is a good thing, that God killed Republicans on the Amtrak train, except that, again, nobody was really killed. But a lot of people are writing this is just too bizarre to be believed. And of course, given that there was a survivor in the trash truck, I'm sure the NTSB is going to say it was their fault. Why did they stop at the railroad crossing? Well, I don't know. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that, somebody sabotaged the truck and put in a remote control cutoff so that as it drove over the intersection, following its schedule, they stalled it out ahead of the chartered train's schedule, if you can get that information. Little out there, but it's so bizarre at this period in the country's history. You can't really rule it on out. So, talking about the State of the Union speech, it was a very good speech. Whoever wrote it for Donald Trump did a fabulous job of pulling it together along with a certain degree of theatricality. A lot of people commented that Donald Trump didn't talk about himself anywhere near as much as Barack Obama used to. And my favorite line of the entire speech was when he was talking about controlling immigration and putting America first. And he says, Americans are dreamers too. And that was a great line. And he's absolutely right. The liberal Democrats try to act like the immigrants are somehow more special than we who have lived in this country for generation after generation after generation. Polls are showing a majority of Americans approved of Trump's State of the Union speech. It generated the most tweets ever of any State of the Union speech since Twitter came into existence. And according to a CBS poll, the State of the Union speech won over 72% of the independents, meaning people who haven't decided if they're going to be voting Republican or Democrat this November. So that is a really, really good sign. And one of the best entertainment moments of the entire speech was looking at the Democrats who refused to stand up, who refused to applaud, except for a couple of moments like wounded veterans and so forth. But to look at their faces And just looking at Chucky Schumer, he was glaring at Donald Trump like maybe he thought his eye lasers could set Trump's hair on fire. And then over on the other side, you had Nancy Pelosi, who was just mouthing off to everybody around her and just had that look of utter disgust and on her face, and she wasn't going to sit still, and she was basically causing a ruckus. I just almost wished I could throw a bucket of water on her just to see if she's going to melt. And it was amazing. And during the end of the immigration section of the speech, Congress started chanting, USA, USA, USA. And some of the Democrats, the pro-open borders one, just walked on out. And one of them was Democrat Representative, Louis Gutierrez just storms out during that USA, USA chant. And it was caught on camera. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. We've got Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I thought of that State of the Union speech was absolutely fantastic. And I thought there was a good, what's the word I want, vibe to it. Like you were talking about the Democrats storming out during the chanting of USA, I was kind of appalled by that, and I was also kind of appalled whenever the Democrats on the Democratic side wouldn't even stand up for some of the people that Trump was recognizing, especially the guy from North Korea who came out of escaped a communist regime, gotten run over by the train and everything. That was one of the most tear-jerking stories. I've never heard that story before, but I thought that was absolutely great that, he brought that up. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts is, he had a lot of good stories that night, especially he was talking about the family members of people who were murdered by the MS-13 gang. That story about this North Korean defector, to me, that was almost a little too over the top. And I'm not saying that it did not actually happen as Trump described it, but it was so out there, it was almost too out there to believe. And I think it would have been better off maybe pulling back and finding something else. I did not agree, obviously, with the latter part of the State of the Union, where he got into the warmongering talk and talking about Russia and North Korea and all of that stuff. That's very, very alarming talk. The war agenda is still apparently front and center for the Trump White House.
Totally agree with that. That kid kind of make me a little mad, but overall I thought it was good. Now, my biggest question that I have was, what in the world was Joe Kennedy even talking about? Like, I'm still bedazzled and perplexed on what that was about.
Well, I don't think anybody really knows, because everybody was looking at that lip gloss that he just slathered on there, and he looked like he was drooling, and apparently that went viral all over the net. But he basically went on out there and tried to attack Trump's position on immigration, and basically he was playing to a selected audience, Massachusetts being a liberal state. But I got some emails from people in Massachusetts saying that he is not doing an impressive job for them, and that he may have that last name of Kennedy, but he is a far cry from what his grandfather was. So I think maybe they were trying to cast him as a future rising star of the Democratic Party, but it's not off to a good start when he's already got the nickname Droolin' Joe.
I mean, if what you say was, that was kind of like, can we say, an attempt to be the Democrat frontrunner, that was an epic fail.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah, I think he's self-destructing as rapidly as Jeb Bush did in 2016.
I hope they run him. I hope they do. I hope the Democrats run him. I mean, yeah, just for the simple fact that it was pathetic. And if that's the best that the Democrats has to offer, oh my God, God help us.
Well, I got to tell you, unless she's forced to leave the country or she's convicted of a felony, I think Hillary Clinton is going to throw her hat in the ring in 2020 again. I mean, she's saying she's never going to run for political office again, and yet she's out there keeping her face in the public view. She's out there on book tours. She's doing TV shows. She's going around. She's getting quoted in the newspapers. She's acting like somebody who's trying to maintain her name brand. And I think she's holding the door open for a run in 2020.
I think you're right, and I think a lot of these, a lot of this stuff, and going back to the Weinstein Gate and everything, and people, in Congress, Democrat could be front runners. I kind of feel like Hillary was behind that, clearing out the field for herself, and just tarnishing people's reputations without any lawsuits or any, without it going to the courts. I kind of feel like she was behind all of that, and I said it before. Weinstein ended up being the victim out of all of this, even though he did what he did. Look at all the, male toxicity here. I mean, it's affecting me on the college campus. I mean, yeah, I have a girlfriend, but walking up and saying hi to a girl on campus seems like a big crime now. Like, it's ridiculous.
Actually, in France, it is a crime. France has passed this ridiculous law where if you ask a girl for her phone number, you can get fined. Now, if she offers it to you, that's okay. But if you ask her for the phone number, she can actually report you to the police, and you will have to pay a fine. That's how completely ridiculous all of this stuff has become.
Oh yeah, this is like Twilight Zone. If this wasn't so serious, this would be one of the greatest cartoons or comedy, on the planet. I mean, but this, I hate to wake up in the mornings because I always ask the question, this can't get any worse, right? And I wake up and the next day it's completely over the top, completely insane.
Yeah, it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I just wanted to call in and weigh my 2 cents on the State of the Union and ask, somebody that would know, what was Joe Kennedy doing? Because I'm confused.
Well, basically, after his opening statement about how his town was built by immigrants, I figured it was going to be the same liberal Democrat stuff, and I couldn't stop laughing at the lip gloss, so at that point I turned him off.
Yeah, see, maybe it's a good thing I'm blind, because I didn't know about the lip gloss until somebody said anything, so, I mean, yeah, I couldn't judge him there. I was just judging about what came out of his mouth, and none of it made sense.
Well, that visual presentation is very important, and politicians learned an object lesson from when Richard Nixon ran against John F. Kennedy. It's now acknowledged Richard Nixon's makeup artist for the televised debate lost him that election. Because it looked like he had 5 o'clock shadow. He wasn't well lit. And it's kind of an interesting study. People who watched the televised debate, thought John F. Kennedy had won it. People who listened to the debate over radio without the visuals thought Richard Nixon had won it. And so that's why politicians have been very sensitive about their appearance and their lighting. And that reminds me, at least Trump has pulled away from that really hard orange look that he had on the campaign trail. And he pulled back from some of the brashness. He's starting to act a lot more presidential.
Totally agree with you. Well, sir, that's all I have for you. I hope you have a great show and a great day, and give Miss Claire the best.
I certainly will. I absolutely will. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we're going to take a phone call from Robert in England. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. Hi. Hello. Hi. Hi.
Hello.
I'd like. This is Robert from England, and I asked myself the question: why is America in north of Israel, north of Syria? Why is it staying there and being a problem to Syria and Russia, etc.? And the answer is, it's holding the line. It's holding the Israeli flag on the river Euphrates. As you know, the Israeli flag is the Star of David with a line above and a line at bottom. And the line
Yes.
above is the river Euphrates, and the line below is the river Nile, and that is
Yes.
Greater Israel. And America is holding Greater Israel, is the outpost, is the flag in the ground for Greater Israel, which is to be a problem for Russia and a problem for Syria and all of their interests. And I believe that America is in big, deep trouble. It will be the trouble for America, and I'll tell you why, if I may just say. I can't prove it to you. I've been wanting to speak to you for all the last week or 2 weeks, trying to come to prove what I want to say, and I can't prove it to you. But my hunch is that there's going to be war. Is it going to be what do you call it, Korea? Is it going to be Europe? And is it going to be Syria? The Americans in Syria, etc. Anywhere there's going to be, the single shot from somebody is going to be all hell let's break, And my question is, I think, if I may just say, Russia needs to be on good terms with Turkey, because Russia wants to come through Turkey into the Middle East. That is the design, That is the biblical future. And if he can come through friendly territory, it's so much easier than coming through enemy territory, having to fight their way through.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. They come through by keeping friends, right? But the thing is that America is for Israel, they're working for the nartocracy, or somebody on the YouTube said it's the what do you call it? The the Israeli nartocracy, etc. And so the first thing is Israel, Israel, Israel. That's their thought. And the issue is that I believe that Russia will hit hard against the Americans, because they're not that large, okay? And if Russia finally gets totally fed up with America, etc., they've been friends all the time, and any war between Russia and America would be such a disgrace against Russia's friendliness towards America. It wants to be friends all the time, and America just says, no, we're enemies, and I'm going to put you down. And that's what's the word? The hatred against somebody who wants to be your friend is really going to make them really upset. And I believe that the weakest bit is the Americans in north of Syria. And if the Russians can hit hard, really hard, like wipe out, annihilate, let's just say, that contingent, then all of the rest of the American forces in NATO, they know what they're going to get. And are they able to face up to that annihilation? And I actually believe, and I could tell you why if I was given a time, that I believe that Russia will reclaim the East Bloc countries of Europe. What was the East Bloc, they will reclaim. There is a reason why I say that. It's biblical, etc. And these things are going to come. I think that any war between between Europe and Russia, Europe is the big loser. And
yes, there's no question about that.
Right, and so the point is that Europe, the EEC, the European Community, started off with 10 countries. And back in the 1970s, we called those the 10 last kingdoms in the biblical sense. And
okay, Robert.
It's now gone to 23. Yep.
Robert, Robert, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to let you go. We're going to take a break for commercials.
Okay.
I'm going to respond.
You've given me a good time.
I'm going to respond to you after we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And if you would like to support Republic Broadcasting, and right now we are in, we're in this fight to get the truth about the FISA memo out, to get the truth about the corruption out. This is it. This is the biggest battle, the biggest war we have ever been in. So if you want to support Republic Broadcasting, the postal address to send a check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to call RBN and pledge to be a recurring subscriber, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Now, responding to Robert's comments, I'm not sure how important the fact that Israel's eventual geopolitical ambitions reach from the Nile to the Euphrates may be. I think the United States is staying in Syria just so it doesn't look like they got kicked out. Everybody wants them to go. The Syrian government wants them out. Turkey wants them out. Turkey basically is angry with the United States right now for supporting a Kurdish state, which Turkey does not want. And between that and the failed coup d'etat against Erdogan, Turkey is pivoting toward Russia. And so Russia is going to escape the garrisoning that the United States has been trying to build around it for well over a decade now. They're going to be able to project power into the Middle East. At the same time, the United States' influence in the region is clearly on the wane. So that's what's going on. I don't see Russia as going after the American troops in Syria because Putin does not want a direct clash between the U.S. and Russia out of concern that it will eventually go nuclear. It's just the way, like how Putin pulled back from this whole issue with Turkey and the Kurds. Small regional war. If Russia gets involved, then it gives the United States the excuse to escalate their presence in Syria, and that's what Russia is trying to prevent. Now, I'll have more about what's going on in Syria here in a little bit, but we're still talking about the State of the Union. And before we do any more of that, let's take a phone call from Cody in Texas. Aloha, Cody. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
UCQ calling Hawaii. We are.
Yes, I'm here.
I'm here in Hawaii. I smell Litanizas all over this train wreck. An abandoned truck left parked on the railroad tracks. The driver's the only supposed fatality, and I'm beginning to think that this is a deliberate plant of a dead truck and a dead driver on the tracks to sabotage that train and hopefully take out some Republicans.
Well, it certainly looked like that, but the last report I had was the truck had two people in it, one of which was only injured and he's in the hospital. But the story may be changing. Okay. If it had been just one person in the truck who was supposedly killed in the collision, then yes, it opens up the possibility somebody actually killed the driver and left the truck there on that crossing in the hope that they were going to derail the entire train. And if so, their math was a little bit off because only the engine came off the tracks and the rest of the train stayed in place.
Okay, well, thank you for putting that to rest for me. It certainly looks suspicious at the outset.
It does look suspicious, and I'm not putting it to rest. I'm waiting to see more information come on out here. But I mean, so close to the State of the Union and looking at the way the Democrats are panicking over what's going on, it could very well have been deliberate.
It sounds definitely like a chapter out of the Clinton Easter book, so.
Yeah, well, it certainly would have added a lot of entries to the dead bodies list. There's no doubt about that. Cody, we're going to let you go. We've got a less than ideal phone connection, and we're going to start with Fred in Iowa. We're probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. Fred, what's on your mind?
What Robert said from England, he have brought up some very salient points, in my opinion. I do not think or believe that there's going to be an all-out nuclear war. But what I do believe and it's biblical, that the second beast will win all the wars and then give his power unto the first beast. And I don't know if you can figure that out, Mike, but give it a try. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you very much for the phone call. And we're going to start with Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, we're definitely going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind today?
Wait, where did Hillary Clinton come back into this?
Yeah, I was. Did anybody see her at the State of the Union? I mean, technically, she's a private citizen now and doesn't have any real reason to be there. But somebody could have invited her. But I think for most of the Democratic Party right now, they see her as a real liability going into the November elections, especially if this FISA memo results in new investigations into the email and Russia collusion. So this is going to be an interesting year, no two ways about it. Dustin, I'm going to have to put you on hold. We got to take another break for commercials. Don't hang up. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking with Dustin in New Jersey, and we're talking about State of the Union speech and everything else that's going on, Syria and Turkey. So, Dustin, just go ahead and start sharing with us.
Yeah, I just wanted to, with the previous caller saying about the second beast, that'd be the Hildebeest, because you got to be a beast to laugh at killing one person, but got to be even more of a beast to kill hundreds of thousands of people in Syria and in Ukraine, thousands of people, and lying about everything. I mean, she's the ultimate beast, next to Obama and Bush.
Agree. I would agree.
Was John McCain, Lindsey Graham, was John McCain at the State of the Union?
I don't recall seeing him, but then I wasn't really taking a head count. I imagine there's a list someplace. Actually, somebody did publish a list of the Democrats who didn't show up. But, in theory, John McCain was over there on the GOP side, and he may have been scowling mightily as well.
Yeah, look, Lindsey Graham didn't look like he was too happy either. Hey, look, Trump, I voted for Trump. I don't like, his speeches were okay, but I just don't like the fact how, do we really need more nuclear weapons? I'd rather have the heating fixed in the schools in, Chicago and Baltimore than, how many more nuclear weapons do you need to blow up the world 1,000 times? I don't know where that came from, Mike. I don't know who's writing his speeches? My God, you can tell it was like reading off a script. But
every president reads off a script. No, presidents don't memorize the State of the Union. They don't speak extemporaneously. Of course, it's scripted, and whoever wrote the script did a really good job. Now, obviously, the content that was in there, the ideas in the agenda, I don't agree with all of it, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But it was a well-crafted speech, and the poll numbers seem to support that.
Yeah, hey, Mike. Do you think he had one too many props of putting people in the audience, though? I remember when Bush did that, and they all do that. Obama did that. I hate that. It just seems like you're throwing him in there just for, it's obviously for political gain, right? You think? For everybody?
Yeah, obviously it is, and I think it's appropriate in certain circumstances, but you can overdo it. I think having the guests in the audience to call attention to, it's kind of like cooking with cayenne pepper. Just a little bit is going to get the result you want. It's going to break up the monotony of just looking continuously at the president. But I do think maybe Trump did it a little more than was wise and prudent. But again, the poll numbers are saying America responded to it, so, who am I to criticize?
And switching gears from that to that caller from the UK, from Britain, he was spot on when it came to Turkey, man, because Bosphorus Straits, Turkey's a more important, ally, especially after the coup, than people realized. They're it. Look at where they're at. But also remember during 9/11, the Russians allowed us to go into Afghanistan because that was their soft underbelly. We had to get permission from them to go into Afghanistan. A lot of people don't know that.
Yes.
Because that was their part of their not territory, but influence per se.
Sphere of influence. I think the reason that Russia allowed the United States to go into Afghanistan was to get the U.S. government tangled up in the same trap that has destroyed so many other empires throughout history, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and so forth. And I'll bet Putin's just laughing his head off over the dumb Americans who walked into Afghanistan thinking that the graveyard of empires was not going to snare them.
Yep. Exactly. And on, and with Syria, the same thing. I mean, the only thing that the caller from Britain didn't mention, besides Israel, is another important fact is Saudi Arabia, because they have a lot of influence also. And, going through Syria was also about pipelines. That was another part of the story, just like Ukraine, and energy, resources to control. Even though you have resources, you want to control everybody's resources, in the long term, I guess. But like that didn't work out. Ukraine didn't work out. So yeah, we're in. I have to say we are in trouble. We are. Mike, real quick, going back to State of the Union, I didn't believe anything though what Trump said about the economy with the low unemployment rates and stuff. Of course, we know that's bogus. The low unemployment numbers. That's one thing.
Yeah, but he was being very clever. He was being very clever because the Democrats are actually trying to take credit for the claim that the economy is improving. In fact, after the State of the Union, Chuck Schumer was out there saying that Trump will never admit that he owes much of the economic recovery to Barack Obama. And so both parties have basically agreed to maintain the fiction of a recovering economy. But one thing that was pointedly not in Trump's State of the Union speech was this $20 trillion time bomb called our national debt. And it's great that companies are getting tax cuts and people are getting tax cuts. And it's rather amazing to see the Democrats face. Apparently somebody even asked Bernie Sanders, isn't it great that ordinary Americans are getting reduction on taxes? And he just stayed silent. Democrats don't think you should be allowed to have any more money than it takes for you to live on and support the shopping malls. And anything more than that, they want to take away and use it to build their liberal utopia. But the fact of the matter is that we do have this huge out-of-control debt and no way to pay it. And as has happened before in history, when the U.S. government gets into this kind of an economic mess, they'll get into a world war as a distraction. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, and look how many countries the U.S. has gone into. Apparently, U.S. Special Operations Forces are now in 3/4 of the countries on planet Earth. Now, most of them are probably very small groups, to just glare at the leadership and say, don't do anything that we don't like, or a lot of our buddies are going to show up.
What the problem with that is, the two big countries blocking world hegemony has nuclear weapons, and Russia has an arsenal slightly larger than ours, and China's got about half of what we have, or Russia has.
Yeah, but they build them bigger. They build them bigger. Yeah. I mean, China's standard warhead. I've talked about this before, back when we had that missile scare here in Hawaii. China's missiles, despite the China Gate transfer of technology, their long-range ballistic missiles are not very accurate. And so they compensate for that with really powerful nuclear warheads. Just one of those, if it were to hit this island, the entire island would be destroyed. That's how powerful they are.
And Mike, real quick, did you notice what color the little thing Chucky Schumer and a lot of those other people were wearing? Purple, color of the revolution, right?
Yes.
That's why they're wearing that purple color. It's a revolution.
They started wearing that right after Hillary Clinton lost the election.
Yeah. So I just want to keep people in mind with that. They're not going to ever let this up. They're going to try to pull something else out of the bag because they're getting to the point where they're real desperate. And it's not only just about Obama and the Democrats and Hillary Clinton. It's about the Bush group and the anti-Trumpers, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and there's other people in there, in the deep state per se, or the think tanks, Bill Kristol, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm talking about. But, those people are they're going to get to a point where they can't allow Trump to stay in there. So they're going to have to pull something else off. Coming soon to a theater near you.
We're starting to see, with Trump in the White House, apparently there are certain parties within Department of Justice and FBI who are now feeling free to actually do the job they want to do. Now, obviously, there are still elements within Department of Justice and FBI, probably CIA and NSA as well, that are still in the Clinton circle that are trying to interfere. But this situation over the FISA memo and the email server, when the investigators are being investigated, this could start spinning out of control. And that's why they're so scared. Everybody went along with what they were doing, Uranium One, the Clinton Foundation, the CIA drug money and everything, because they were convinced Hillary Clinton was going to be the president right now, and she would make sure that nothing happened in the Department of Justice and the FBI the same way that Barack Obama worked to protect Hillary Clinton in the Department of Justice and the FBI. So that's what happened there. Dustin, are you there? Okay, apparently we lost Dustin. So let's take one more phone call, and then we're going to put the phone on hold because I got a lot of stuff to get through today. Ted in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I got a quick question for you and then a follow-up question. I was wondering if you've heard of QAnon and what your thoughts on them are.
Well, it's hard to get a read on them. They're supposed to be this group that is trying to go public about a gigantic pedophilia scandal that's supposed to be Pizzagate on steroids. But so far, there's really been no provenance yet. They're posting over on that, I think it's 4chan, which has a reputation for just letting anybody say absolutely anything. So until something substantive appears, I'm really not paying a lot of attention to them right now.
Sure. Well, I got something of substance for you. On January 14th, he posted this. He said, trust sessions, TG departure bracket, AGC bracket, not to testify, not needed to testify, think logically. No need to step down if needed to testify. So with Trey Gowdy stepping down, this just happened. It's really interesting with how this QAnon has been predicting things like this, and how he's been posting things that will be in the president's next tweet, and he's been doing that to show that he is with the president, that he is in communications with him, and it's really an interesting thing. And with this Trey Gowdy stepping down, and then I just saw his old post from the 14th. It just blows my socks off how much he's just been nailing things like this. And if
well,
you want,
how would somebody? Let me ask you a question. How would somebody who's inside the White House have known about Trey Gowdy's decision because you just announced it today? And we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. I'll tell you what. I'll take an honest look at this guy and these posts. And see if there's any kind of a track record there. But I sort of learned long ago to be very cautious about supposed anonymous insiders, because very often their real job is to trick people in the independent media to go chasing down the wrong path and to keep us looking at the left hand while the right hand is, putting the rabbit in the hat.
Absolutely agree with you. But he has been, if you look up the SGT report on YouTube, and there's a couple other ones, he has really been doing it every other week. He'll dump something, and then it will be in the president's tweet. He talked about Dopey, that Prince Al-Azir guy, being released in Saudi Arabia, and he said, look up Black Forest. And it's just really interesting. And then the president, tweeted about Dopey a long time ago when he said he's using his daddy's money to run the U.S. politics. And then
Ted, you've convinced me. I'll take a look, okay? And I thank you for that. I'm going to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call. I really do want to get back to some real news here today. So we're going to take one more phone call from Philip in Virginia, and then we're going to close the phone lines. Philip, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind today?
Hey, aloha, Mike. Yeah, a couple things real quick. Too bad you didn't get to see that I wrote it down here, the SBBSME, the Super Blue Blood Snow Moon Eclipse.
Actually, I did get to see it. There was a break in the clouds. I went out when the eclipse was underway, and there was a hole in the clouds, and I got to see it. Not for a long time, but I did get to see it. So I'm feeling very butch about that.
I got to see it at NASA had a live stream from the Armstrong Flight Center there, and the Griffith facility there that was pretty close in proximity. But one thing I thought was interesting about it, you might be able to explain it. From the Armstrong feed, it was showing it from a top to bottom coverage. And the Griffith feed, which I think is like a little bit east of Armstrong, it was an east to west coverage, gradual eclipse. Can you explain that?
Well, the Griffith Observatory is in Los Angeles. It's located actually very close to the Hollywood sign. And it all depends on how the camera is mounted to the telescope, and whether or not the telescope is tracking in equatorial mode or as an alt-azimuth mount. And certainly the Griffith telescope is a polar mount. I don't know what they were using at the Armstrong Center. It may have been an alt-azimuth mount. Most of the world's really large telescopes are alt-az mounts because the polar mounts are too difficult to build. As you can see if you ever visit the Mount Palomar Observatory. And then they use an image rotator to correct for the rotation as the telescope tracks the objects across the sky. So there's really nothing all that significant about it.
Okay, all right. Well, appreciate that info there. Yeah, a lot of them, they left out the fact that it was also the snow moon. So that's the many different labels associated with this historical event. But also a comment about the train crash incident. Yeah, that could have been a recipe for disaster if there was, like a coup attempt or something like that. They were out there in the sticks. I saw the video of that, and they could have had a hostage situation develop there if there was, do you know what any kind of security detail that accompanies them on that trip, or are they just basically like, the public? Just low-level security.
Well, it's a chartered train. It's a chartered train, so the public is not allowed on it. And I assume there's going to be some kind of security, especially after that unfortunate shooting incident a year or so ago that was targeting Republicans. And again, we need to get more information whether there was a survivor in the truck or if there was just one dead person in the truck who may have been dead before the impact actually occurred. But at this point, when you see the purple ribbons and you hear the venom coming out of people's mouths for the partisan politics, we cannot rule out the possibility that somebody was trying to kill a whole bunch of Republican members of Congress in order to secure control of the Congress in the November elections. You can't rule it out. That's just the way things are right now.
Can I leave you with this? False missile alert story changes again.
We're going to talk about it later on. We got to take a break here for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And getting on back to the State of the Union speech, Trump came on out, started with the economic news or the economic propaganda, which is a continuation of the same propaganda that we have seen for the past several administrations that don't want Americans to understand just how badly Washington, D.C. and the Federal Reserve have messed up our entire country. And so he went along with that, and everybody was responding to that positively. Then he started on the immigration issue, and he played that up and scored a lot of points with that. Then he started getting into some of the stuff that I think should concern a lot of people. He made a big deal of saying that just before he stepped onto the floor of the House of Representatives, that he signed an executive order to keep Guantanamo Bay prison open, and he was directing Secretary of Defense Mattis to basically reevaluate how captured terrorists are treated. Now, this is a very dangerous situation because we know from places like Abu Ghraib that a lot of innocent people who had done absolutely nothing wrong were sent to these torture centers and they were tortured, some of them to death, to find weapons of mass destruction which turned out not to exist, for all you Kafka fans out there. And so basically then went on with the bit about North Korea, which I think he was just a touch heavy-handed with, and talking about, more military, more nuclear weapons, just maintaining that war agenda. Now, the Democrats, of course, are out there trying to respond and say, this is all nonsense. As I mentioned before, Chuck Schumer is saying that Trump is taking credit for an economic recovery that Barack Obama engineered. And interestingly enough, some of these Democrats don't even really know what they're talking about. They're just flapping their gums to flap their guns. Democratic Representative Brenda Lawrence was slamming Trump for focusing on what she described as the M16 street gangs. What she meant was the MS-13 gangs, because Trump had the family members of Americans who've been killed by these MS-13 gang members who are in this country illegally. And so Brenda Lawrence is out there saying, he shouldn't focus on the M16 street gangs. Doesn't even know what she's talking about. And yes, the official Democratic rebuttal to the State of the Union was delivered by Joe Kennedy III. He's the grandson of Robert F. Kennedy. And basically went on saying, our town in Massachusetts was built by immigrants. Yeah, a really, really long time ago when we needed immigrants. Claimed that Trump was a bully and a divider. But people weren't paying attention because apparently he had slathered on this lip gloss. And there was so much of it, it made it look like he was drooling. And already there are cartoons and all kinds of things all over the net calling him Droolin' Joe. That's his nickname for the foreseeable future. Droolin' Joe. That's going to be a long time recovering from that one. If this was an effort to sell Joe Kennedy III as a rising Democratic star, as that caller said, it's an epic fail. He came off looking really, really bad. Okay, we should be hearing some music anytime now for our station identification, and when we come on back from this, we are going to be talking about the FISA memo and what it portends. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2. The phone lines are closed for now until I can get caught up in some of this news here. We will open them again later on in the show, but I need to get some things out here and stuff that's really, really very important to get on out there. And let's see where we are. According to White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, the FISA memo is about to be released. He's describing it as quickly. He's not putting a specific date on it. Apparently, the reason it has not been released yet, it is still under review by the White House counsel. And I certainly cannot fault Donald Trump for not wanting to make a mistake with what is potentially a critical piece of evidence, if you will. Let alone its value for political impact. Now, the FBI has gone public blasting the FISA memo. And basically they issued a statement earlier today saying that this Republican-drafted memo alleging government abuse of spying laws is leaving out important facts. Okay. How do they know? The memo hasn't been released yet. Nobody at the FBI has seen it. It's only been seen by members of the House Intelligence Committee and now the White House. So if the FBI is spying on the House Intelligence Committee, that's an abuse of spying laws. Or if the FBI has an informant, a remole, inside the White House, that's an abuse of spying laws. I think they've just made things look a lot worse. On another version of the same interview, the FBI flat out came on out and said, it's full of lies. Take it from us. we're the FBI, we never get these things wrong, it's full of lies. Yeah, the FBI gets stuff wrong. They totally blew the attack on Pearl Harbor. British double agent Dusko Popov gave them the entire plan in August of 1941, and the FBI said, nah, can't possibly be real, threw it in the trash. Remember when they were first starting to acknowledge there was such a thing as organized crime? And the FBI put together this huge report, well researched, on how criminals were organizing and cooperating across the country to maximize their profits. And J. Edgar Hoover just wrote rubbish on the cover and threw it in the trash. The FBI, they get a lot of things wrong. They certainly got a lot of things wrong in COINTELPRO. Remember that Black Panther coloring book they put on out there to try and increase division between blacks and whites? And it was called the Black Panther Coloring Book. And the drawings were very inflammatory, but they couldn't be colored. They weren't drawn like you would expect to see drawings in a coloring book be drawn. They were just rough sketches. Now, Paul Ryan is saying that it's time to cleanse the FBI. Let it all out. Get it all out there. Just tell the American people how bad it really is and cleanse the organization. This is going to be the biggest scandal, probably even bigger than the exposures of COINTELPRO. And America was shocked when they found out some of that stuff. Like the FBI was behind the Black Panther coloring book. The FBI was behind the day the hippies took over Disneyland. That was used to discredit the anti-Vietnam movement. That's not law enforcement. In many cases, it was breaking the law. And it looks like they're back to the old habits, as it were. Apparently, Senator Cory Booker is in a panic over the impending release of the FISA memo. And he's out there saying, releasing that memo, it's treason. It's treason. It's giving aid and comfort to our enemies. So, yeah, a lot of people are saying, you can see them sweating about it. Trey Gowdy is out there saying that the reason Adam Schiff is trying as hard as he can to get this thing delayed or blocked is it's going to be personally embarrassing to him. Now, a former Secret Service agent, Dan Bongino, is out there in a TV interview with Tucker Carlson saying that the FISA memo intel leads directly to Barack Obama's desk. In other words, all of this was being ordered by Barack Obama. The burying of the email scandal, the ginning up excuses to bug political opponents, both before and after the election itself, and finally this ginning up this phony Russiagate scandal to try and get Trump out of office. And that's why I keep saying this is the Democratic version of Watergate. And it's wider in scale and scope, but this is essentially what Richard Nixon did. He used the intelligence agencies of the United States to attack political enemies, to discredit and sabotage Democratic candidates that he was afraid could beat him in the general election. So that when the general election came around, he ran against George McGovern, who he knew he could beat. And in fact, Richard Nixon won his re-election by the widest margin in U.S. election history. So now we have Barack Obama, who's being accused by people on the inside of doing exactly the same thing, using the nation's intelligence agencies to spy on political enemies and possibly sabotage them, discredit them, come up with information with which they could be smeared and destroyed in the media. Now, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Over at the Health Ranger, he's making a point that needs to be made over and over and over again. You are not going to hear a lot of this stuff in the corporate media, because the corporate media is a part of this scandal. They have been acting as the Ministry of Propaganda for the deep state. They're still out there claiming there was collusion between Trump and Russia. Every single day it gets mentioned. It was even mentioned by the commentators on last night's State of the Union speech that Russia interfered with our election in 2016. No evidence for that has been found at all. But the corporate media's job is to keep selling you that idea. So whatever's in the FISA memo, whatever's going to come out of this investigation of the investigators, it is not going to be in the corporate media until we force the issue. Until we call up and the news departments of the local TV station saying, look, this stuff is all over the internet. This is an official U.S. government document from the House Intelligence Committee that says the President of the United States was spying on candidate Donald Trump using the intelligence agencies. Why are you not reporting this thing? Make a big stink about it. Now, more information is surfacing about Andrew McCabe. And interestingly enough, he had been in charge of this Trump-Russia probe. So there's a little bit of irony because according to a story in last month's True Pundit, Andrew McCabe had a serious and problematic connection to Russian officials and Russian organized crime figures. Now, both former FBI chiefs, Robert Mueller and James Comey, seem to ignore McCabe's connections to Russia, despite other agents catching McCabe tampering in Russian-linked cases. And maybe Mueller and Comey weren't too concerned, but apparently the CIA's counter-espionage division may have opened a formal case on McCabe. So again, they're screaming Trump-Russia collusion, and the real collusion is over on the other side. Now, McCabe is also under a current active Department of Justice investigation for his delaying on the Anthony Weiner laptop emails. The Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz wants to know why McCabe allegedly took little to no action for 3 weeks on the trove of emails sent by Hillary's top aide Huma Abedin, Weiner's wife, which were discovered by the New York police during an unrelated investigation into Weiner's sexting with an underage girl. Basically, what McCabe did was not let them go anywhere until after the election was over to protect Hillary Clinton's chances of getting into the White House. So those of us who were putting out the negative information on Hillary, we were literally at war with the FBI, which was trying to bury all this stuff. And I think we can count coup with Trump's election victory. Another article, this one from 12160. Again, FBI's McCabe intentionally held off investigation of newly discovered Clinton emails found on Weiner's computer until after the election. And apparently, they've never actually been investigated fully. They're still sitting in a closet somewhere. And who knows what incriminating information is in there. It's time for a special counsel on all of this, and not one that's appointed by Rod Rosenstein. Now, the FBI is apparently aware that there was a second dossier created saying there were links between Trump and Russia, and basically repeating everything that was in the Christopher Steele dossier about Trump's misbehaving with prostitutes in a Moscow hotel. This particular dossier was written by former journalist and Clinton hatchet man Cody Shearer. And the thinking is now that because it was Cody Shearer, that nobody was going to believe the dossier, and that's when the decision was made to basically launder the propaganda through Fusion GPS. Basically take what Cody Shearer had outlined and get it to Christopher Steele and see if he could confirm it or flesh it out. And of course, there was never any confirmation, but the report came on back with Christopher Steele's name on it, Fusion GPS on it, which gave it more credibility than simply being something put together by Cody Shearer. Now, as one of our callers mentioned earlier today, Trey Gowdy has announced he's retiring from Congress. And I know it's a sad day because he's been one of the go-getters out there. He's been one of the major forces trying to get at what's going on in the deep state. And in his announcement, he's basically said he's announcing now so that other members of his state, South Carolina, can meet the filing deadline to run for his seat. Now, he's not retiring. His statement that he issued is that he's pretty fed up with what politics has come to be in Washington, D.C., and he wants to return to the Justice Department, where he feels it's a little bit more honorable, and that's where he wants to be. So I have a suggestion. Let's all write to the President, Donald Trump, and get Trey Gowdy appointed as Attorney General at the Department of Justice. It's where he says he wants to be. And boy, would he be good as an investigator over there, because our current Attorney General, like his predecessor, doesn't seem well motivated to look at deep state corruption inside Washington, D.C. It's very frustrating to have to look at. All right, let's turn to the war zones, because things are unfortunately still heating up over there. Apparently a Turkish military column was hit by a car bomb in southwestern Aleppo, and the vehicle was destroyed. A few others were damaged. And according to initial reports on the ground, 2 or 3 service members were killed in the attack. Later, the Turkish General Staff denied the initial reports and said that a civilian support worker of the Turkish Armed Forces had been killed, as well as another civilian worker and a service member injured. Now, the military added it was deployed in the area under a de-escalation deal reached with Russia and Iran and during the Astana talks in May. Now, at this point, Russia is not withdrawing from Syria, and photos have surfaced of Russia bringing in additional supplies to Syria via the port in Tartus. So I guess Putin is getting ready to basically take the position that Russia will remain in Syria as long as the United States does. And apparently, according to this story over in globalsecurity.org, the U.S. says they have no plans to withdraw from Syrian Manbij, despite Turkey's warning that any Americans who are embedded with the Kurdish forces are legitimate targets. So what's going to happen here? It's only a matter of time before more Americans get killed and the war hawks have a bloody shirt to wave. And clearly, the U.S. and Turkey are adversaries in this. And that's just going to push Turkey away. And I think it was folly for whoever thought that they were going to set up a Kurdish enclave inside Syria and have Turkey just sit still for it, let alone Syria. So right now, the United States is odd man out in that part of the world. The Kurds are feeling betrayed. The Turks are sneering at the U.S., wants them out. Russia wants them out. The Syrian government wants them out. We really have, by any reasonable definition of the word, we've lost in Syria. And the only reason the U.S. refuses to leave is so they don't have to acknowledge that fact. And they're hoping to find some other way to convince the American people to justify a new surge into Syria. Assad is gassing his own people again. He's a horrible dictator. He dances barefoot on shag carpeting. He passes wind in elevators. We've got to get him. He's a threat to all mankind. Now, as you know, they just had a huge meeting up in Sochi. And Turkey basically welcomed a decision for the formation of a constitutional committee by the Syrian National Dialogue Congress. And basically, this is coming from the opposition groups to Bashar al-Assad. And Turkey thinks this is really great. Now, 11 members of that Syrian opposition group took part in the Sochi Congress, and U.S., Great Britain, France were represented at the same meeting here. Interestingly enough, there was a lot of speeches going on, and there were the opening speech was by Russia's foreign minister, and it kind of wandered off script, and apparently there was some pro and anti Russian sentiments being expressed, but CNN only broadcast the anti-Russian comments. Because Russia is evil, Russia is bad. You've got to remember that. Now, apparently the Syrian delegation who went up to Sochi were on their way home, and they were fired on by terrorists who tried to shoot their plane down. Interesting. Two more stories you have to take together to sort of understand where I'm going with this. According to the BBC, the Taliban basically has free run of 70% of Afghanistan. They're openly active in 70% of that country. After all the billions of dollars the United States has spent to defeat them, they're active in the majority of the country. Now, the Afghan government is saying, that's ridiculous. What a silly thing you're saying there. But there's this other story that came on out from Sputnik News saying that all of a sudden the U.S. Department of Defense is refusing to disclose any detailed information about the war in Afghanistan. Now, when they started this war in Afghanistan back in 2001, there were routine briefings. Numbers, facts, figure. And all of a sudden, it has stopped. And so taken together with the BBC report, this tells me the U.S. is losing in Afghanistan as well. And they don't want to admit that. So this is serious, serious stuff. Article out of Zero Hedge, the dirty game to fuel ethnic proxy war across the greater Middle East. And basically says that at least part of the U.S. strategy in the region is to simply fan up other countries and get them to fight each other, kill each other off, make it easier for the U.S. and Israel to carve up what's left. Certainly, it looks like that's what they're doing inside Syria. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more news after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting on back to the war zones. Over in Qatar, they're going to expand the largest U.S. air base in the Mideast and make it a permanent fixture. And they plan to host the Navy as well. So dynamics are shifting over there. Resources are shifting over there. Everybody's getting ready. Everybody's arming up for the next great war. Apparently, this effort by the United States to arm Kiev, which is causing a great deal of concern in Russia, isn't going all that well for a very simple reason. Kiev is out of money, and nobody wants to loan them any. All of the industrial base, the money-making part of Ukraine, was over in those eastern Ukrainian republics, and Ukraine has spent what money it had fighting all these wars. They're out of money, and they've maxed out their credit cards. So apparently, the new deal is going to be that Ukraine wants to rent U.S. weapons with which to retake Donbass. Because that will apparently be much lower in cost. You only pay for when you actually need them, and everybody knows that, wars follow a schedule, that it's only going to be a few weeks, and then we'll return the weapons that haven't been blown on up. And the U.S. may go along with this, not because it makes business sense or military sense. It's sort of going to be an updated version of America's Lend-Lease program to Great Britain, which allowed the U.S. to arm Great Britain in the run-up to World War II, even though officially the United States was a neutral nation. Now, Russia has just officially accused the U.S. of trying to meddle in their upcoming election. And the Kremlin said that this next report from the U.S. Treasury Department that is going to lead, well, it's already been released, lead to sanctions against Putin-linked oligarchs is a direct and obvious attempt by the U.S. government to meddle in Russia's upcoming presidential election. Now, one area where Russia is definitely ahead of the United States has to do with their Arctic technology. The Arctic is a very rough place. And I remember I used to watch Top Gear on BBC when it was still Jeremy Clarkson and James May and Richard Hammond, and they did this one show where they literally drove to the North Pole. Now, it was the North Magnetic Pole, which is a lot easier to get at. But they had a really rough time of it. And, of course, it's easy for these nuclear submarines, which keep themselves warm and toasty with the reactors, to sail under the ice and pop up and take a picture, hey, I'm at the North Pole. But it's a very rough environment, for ongoing continuous commerce. And that is why Russia has really developed the technology of some major icebreakers, very large icebreakers, very powerful icebreakers, nuclear powered, where they can just carve a channel through the ice for commercial shipping. And they have this tremendous advantage over the United States, which means that the United States' ambitions to try and cordon off more of the Arctic for its own use are already at a serious disadvantage. Now, I would think that the obvious solution would be that if you are a country that borders the Arctic, that you would simply find your eastmost and westmost points and draw a line from there to the North Pole. And just cut out that little pie section. For Canada, that would be quite large. For Russia, certainly very large. It covers 9 time zones. For the United States, maybe limited to Alaska. But apparently the U.S. has a plan where they are trying to lay claim to most of the Arctic abyssal plain, where there's a huge amount of undeveloped oil, which is going to be difficult to get at. Let's not kid ourselves. You're dealing with the extreme cold, which makes metal brittle. You're dealing with the extreme depths. You know what happened on the Deepwater Horizon. Now, the CIA director, Mike Pompeo, was interviewed on BBC and said that the CIA has determined that North Korea is just months away from being able to hit the United States with a nuclear-tipped missile. And he concluded by saying, we are mindful that Kim Jong-un continues to present a risk not only to the United States, but to the world, which is a pretty silly statement when you recall that the only nation to ever actually use a nuclear weapon of mass destruction on the civilians of another country is the United States. Nobody else has ever done it, because the whole point of a nuclear weapon is to discourage other countries from invading you. And Kim Jong-un is not going to throw that away. They've made it very clear. They're building those missiles, they're building those nuclear warheads, so the United States will not invade. And Kim Jong-un is not just going to throw away that deterrent. He's going to guard and protect that. He's not going to use that unless he's given no choice by an invading United States of America. And I was, in fact, very alarmed by the Warhawk talk about North Korea during the State of the Union speech. I thought Maddox were trying to talk Donald Trump out of it. Apparently, it didn't work. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the war zones. We're talking about North Korea. And yesterday there was a report that Secretary of Defense Mattis was trying to convince Trump, we can deal with North Korea. If they actually attack somebody, we can deal with it at that point. And that going into North Korea was going to be disastrous for all parties involved. But to judge by Trump's comments during the State of the Union speech, he's all gung-ho. He's ready to go on in there and basically take on Kim Jong-un himself. And so over in Pravda, they have an article that's titled, An Open Letter to the International Criminal Court, The Genocide Conspiracy Against North Korea. And basically talking about how, since the beginning of the Korean War, that there just seems to be this constant enmity. And they're talking about every time there's been a meeting to try and talk about this, the U.S. is continuing to push the position. War, and more war. And basically, It all comes down to the fact that these constant threats against North Korea are because the Democratic People's Republic of Korea refuses to accept the world hegemony of the American empire. It has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. And we know that because of Iran, which doesn't have nuclear weapons and is still in the crosshairs because it refuses to be part of the U.S. global empire. And I'm a little concerned because we've heard about global empires before and they never work out well. In the long run, they always fall apart, and during that time, everybody that's caught inside the imperium suffers greatly. I mean, we're taught in this school about Alexander the Great, and he conquered the entire known world. Isn't he amazing? He's great and he's wonderful. Until you actually dig into the history and realize that while he did some things that were kind of cool, overall, the people who lived under his conquests, they did suffer for it. Alexander did not go on out there and conquer the known world in order to just give free stuff to all the people in those countries. It doesn't work that way. Now, I have to view this next story as being just a little suspicious due to the timing. As you know, we're coming up on the Winter Olympics. And all of a sudden, superflu outbreaks are ravaging the Korean peninsula. North Korea is dealing with 81,000 people infected with swine flu. South Korea is killing off 1 million chickens trying to get a sudden outbreak of bird flu under control on their side of the border. And nearly 127,000 North Koreans were reported to have flu-like illness between December 1st and January 16th, with these 81,000 cases testing positive for influenza A, H1N1, known as the swine flu. Just all of a sudden pops up in both Koreas just before the Olympics. I find the timing a little questionable. On the other hand, it has been a really nasty flu year, and apparently it caught everybody by surprise. Now, Donald Trump is apparently starting to think about China. As you know, there have been this series of provocative actions against Russia, including the so-called Kremlin list that puts sanctions on virtually the entire leadership of the Russian government. And we know that Donald Trump is talking trade war with China. Now, as that earlier caller mentioned, the two biggest obstacles to the U.S. global hegemonic domination are China and Russia, who are nuclear-armed nations. And Russia's nuclear missiles are known to work. China's missiles are a little less than accurate, but they build the bombs really, really big. Now, trade wars often turn into real wars. But if the U.S. really thinks they're going to be the military arm of the one world government and the new world order, then yeah, they're seriously talking about war with Russia and China. And Paul Craig Roberts, I think about 2 months ago, reported that his insiders in Washington, D.C. said it was openly being talked about just having a preemptive nuclear strike on these countries and get it over with. And just hope for the best when it came to retaliation. Now, speaking of bombs, somebody is floating this story that Russia has invented an autonomous underwater vehicle that can travel at something like 100 knots, which is amazingly fast. It has a range of 6,000 miles, and it carries a 100-ton nuclear warhead. And frankly, this strikes me as propaganda. To demonize Russia, to get us afraid. It's an updated version of Saddam's nuclear weapons. And the reason I say that is very, very simple. Anything that's going 7,500 knots underwater is making a lot of noise. And every warship is going to hear it. Now, maybe it's nuclear powered to give it a 6,000 mile range, but I would almost wonder how would it navigate? Because when you're underwater, you cannot get GPS. And inertial navigation systems, they're good, but they're not great. One of the lesser-known secrets of the Apollo mission was they invested a huge amount of money trying to develop an inertial navigation system that was simply a box that would very accurately measure rotations and movements back and forth. And the idea was they would initialize it on the launch pad at Cape Kennedy, and then as it flew into space, it would automatically tell them exactly where they were on their way to the moon. And it actually, in practice, proved to have an accumulating error that rendered it almost unusable. And so the reason the Apollo had a sextant was to literally recalibrate the inertial navigation system. Submarines have to do exactly the same thing. Submarines will use inertial navigation systems, but every once in a while they got to come to the surface and get a GPS fix and dial in the correction, or they could run into something very large underwater. So there's the navigation issue of this supposedly unmanned system. And then finally, a 100 megaton nuclear bomb is very, very large. The Soviet Union did build just one. It was never intended to be deployed. It was a technology demonstrator. And when they finally set it off, they were so afraid of it, they dialed it back down to 50 megatons, and it still left a gigantic scar on the Earth, which you can see in Google Earth. So I look at the story and I don't give it a lot of credence. I think it's just more of this Saddam's nukes, Assad's gas. We gotta make the American people afraid of Russia, so they'll fling their money at the war budget and they'll fling their babies onto those Russian bayonets. I think that's what's going on. Okay, let's talk about the economy. As you know, a lot of people are into investment metals, and we may be on the verge of seeing silver start to go up in price, because according to this article out of Investment Watch blog, the world's largest silver mines are all reporting rising costs and falling ore grades. They may be getting down to the bottom of those ore deposits. They don't last forever. They don't last forever. And then, of course, you have the industrial uses of silver, and the fact that unless it's carefully protected, silver will tarnish and has to be re-refined time and time again. But if, in fact, the supply of new silver coming into the market is reduced, that's going to make the price of silver you are currently holding go on up. Now, yesterday, as you know, we had this major drop on the stock markets, almost 400 points on the Dow. And I've got a clarification about exactly what happened. Apparently, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, and Jamie Dimon just announced they're creating a non-profit health insurance company. And the idea is that they're going to fill that very large marketplace of customers who can't afford the Obamacare compliant or any health insurance sold by the for-profit companies. Now, maybe they're just doing this out of the goodness of their heart, or maybe there's going to be some other aspect that they can use to monetize this thing. But it shocked the healthcare stocks, especially the health insurance stocks, and that's what led the sell-off and the plunge yesterday. Now, as you know, right about the time Russia went from being our good friend and buddy to our worst enemy, Vladimir Putin took over control of Russia's central bank. And basically their central bank, it still has its original private owners, but they don't run it. Putin basically banned all Rothschild-style banking in Russia, and surprise, surprise, something they don't want you to know. Russia's economy is making progress because they're not enslaved to all that Rothschild bank produced debt. And that's why Russia has become our dire enemy, because nations that are not enslaved, or rather nations that are enslaved to private central banks that are just siphoning off huge amounts of wealth like a parasite, they can't compete with countries that don't allow private central banking. That's what made Germany under Hitler such a threat to the rest of Europe. Because when the Nazis came to power, they shut down the private central bank imposed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, and they created a new state bank and a new currency based on a unit of value, not something loaned into circulation at interest. And the change to Germany's economy was an absolute miracle. In fact, that's what it was called, the German miracle. And Adolf Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1937 for this amazing transformation of having come into power with a Germany that was just struggling under constant economic recession, and in only a few years turning it into a manufacturing powerhouse against which other countries, especially Great Britain, couldn't compete. In fact, all during this was going on, Winston Churchill was on the radio telling the people of Great Britain that if Germany was allowed to become a major economic power again, that they would have fought World War I in vain. A lot of this is in my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, if you want to follow up with more detail. But what we have now is history repeating itself. Russia shut down private central banking. They're running it as a state bank. They're running it for the benefit of the country and the benefit of the people. This is a threat to every other country enslaved to a private central bank. And that's a big reason why all of a sudden this post-Soviet Union Russia, who had been our friend, our trading partner, built a space station in partnership. We're all good buddies, and all of a sudden we're enemies again. You refuse to live in debt slavery to the private central bankers. You are now our enemy. But apparently Russia has reduced its foreign debt by 75%, making it the 6th largest economy in the world. When was the last time the United States reduced any of its debt? I think that may go back all the way to Andrew Jackson, who shut down the second bank of the United States and succeeded in paying off the national debt, something no other president since then has accomplished. And let's be very honest, as much as workers are enjoying Trump's tax cuts, it's basically going to have a dramatic effect on the national debt, which is why he didn't mention that aspect of it in last night's State of the Union address. Story out here saying critical analysis reveals that cryptocurrency ICO white papers are mostly complete junk, written by clueless noobs who all thought they were going to be the next Steve Jobs. And as you know, a lot of these cryptocurrencies, these newer ones, have fallen onto hard times. Some have even turned out to be criminal operations. Getting on back to this idea of a new nonprofit health insurance industry, the cost of the cheapest Obamacare premiums has skyrocketed 35% in Washington, D.C. this year. 1/3. And, of course, Trump made a big deal about how they ended the individual mandate. And he also said some other things that I really liked about trying to bring down prescription medication costs, and he hit that point. In other countries, you can buy the exact same medications for far, far less. What's going on? Of course, we know what's going on. Price gouging. The medical industrial complex exploits your pain and your suffering and your fear to maximize their profitability. Now, over in Colorado, in order to help protect illegals from deportation, Denver has decriminalized pooping on the pavement because there used to be a law, and you would be arrested and you would be in jail, and that would make it possible for Immigration and Customs Enforcement to locate you and put you on the bus back down to the border. So Denver has now said it's perfectly legal to poop on the pavement. Nobody's going to go to jail for it. This is a state that has a law where you can't borrow vacuum cleaners from your neighbors, and that if you graffiti a rock in a state park, you're going to go to prison. A little harsh. I sort of agree with that last one. But banning a neighbor from borrowing a vacuum cleaner and now legalizing pooping on the pavement, it almost seems like it's not worth it going to Colorado just because they legalized marijuana. Over at the New York Times, columnist David Brooks is out there making the claim that immigrants are superior to Americans and their children. and basically says that Americans are just inferior to immigrants in every way because the immigrants they're driven. They're ambitious. They have dreams, and ordinary Americans, they're just lazy louts. Which is complete and utter nonsense. And this gets back to that wonderful moment in Trump's speech last night, where he was out there saying, Americans are dreamers too. Yeah, we have dreams and ambitions. We want a better life for ourselves. We want a country that's strong. We want our borders controlled so our children can go out and play at night without being targeted by the MS-13 gang members. But for David Brooks to say that immigrants are superior to Americans, well, then let them pay all the taxes. We're off the hook. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go ahead and reopen the phone lines now for the rest of the show here, because I got through the stuff I really wanted to get to here. Okay, let's see. I got a very funny email about my comments about Alexander the Great. I have some very intelligent and funny people who follow the website and the show. Over in Great Britain, there's a big stink going on because the BBC, which is funded by the British taxpayers, has been accused of Brexit bias. And apparently, an analysis was done by the Institute for Economic Affairs, which was following another report by the think tank Civitas last week, and basically pointed out that 2/3 of the guests on the Today program were anti-leave. They were Remainers. It was not a fair and balanced representation. They were just trying to present one side of the argument and only give the illusion that they were presenting the other side of the argument. This is a little bit out there, and I don't know exactly why this happened, but there's this British left-wing group that basically was marking the anniversary of the beheading of Charles I by calling for the execution of Queen Elizabeth II, who's the current British head of state. And even members of their own Labour Party were saying, this is deeply offensive. And yes, it is. I mean, let's be very honest. The Queen does not really have that much real authority anymore in Great Britain. It is more of a ritual that the Prime Minister will request the Queen's permission to set up a new government, and then Parliament and the Prime Minister basically take care of everything, and the Queen just goes queening around. And let's also be very honest. She's not going to be around much longer anyway. But that really is a little bit out there. I'm very troubled by all this talk about killing people, whether it's Queen Elizabeth II or Donald Trump or these other people. It's very, very alarming. Things over in Germany and France are starting to get very dynamic. Story coming out of the Express in Great Britain. Apparently Angela Merkel's ongoing attempts to reform the Grand Coalition with the Social Democrats is being denounced, saying that it will result in a more bureaucratic and less stable European Union. And this is all coming from business leaders in Germany. So some of Merkel's support are starting to turn on her. And it's actually getting on out there where Merkel's allies are saying it's time for her to step down as chancellor. It is time for Merkel to step away and look for a new replacement. Certainly the German people are just fed up with the open borders. That's going to be a career killer for a lot of the member nations' leadership. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with hour number 3. We have a caller waiting on the line, so stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to take a phone call from Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Thank you.
Hugs to Claire. And speedy recovery to her. Continued. This is almost a multifaceted call, but I'm going to make it short, as quick, as brief as I can in each part of it. Obviously, I did not bother listening to the State of the Union or whatever you want to call that thing, for that matter, because I stopped doing that decades ago. I'm not going to say how far back because I'd be telling on my age. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
However, gotcha, didn't I? Anyway.
Yes.
I'm just trying to figure out several things. One, this thing about the so-called tax cut, let alone whether it be a corporate one for businesses or one for the everyday person on the streets that has a roof over their head and having to work and so forth ad nauseum. Supposedly being a tax cut of like $40 or something or so much percent, the question is that applied to a month or to the course of the 365-day year? Now, if it's going to vary based on how many people in the family are working, one person, two person, and what their gross income is. Trump made a point last night of saying that under the new tax plan, a working couple that makes $24,000 a year or less will pay no income tax whatsoever. It's hard to imagine anybody being able to live on $24,000 a year in this country right now. Well, there you go, because that sounds like a complete joke. However,
yes.
even if you end up making over that and supposedly paying little tax at all, as I discussed with my other half, he made a comment of it being like $40 of a deduction, and I'm thinking, is that a month or is that during the course of a year? And so either way, regardless, it's basically an insult and a slap in the face of the everyday person who is working. It's just, if it was a couple thousand, now you're giving the everyday person a break. They can actually go out and do some shopping or whatever, not putting on some piece of plastic called a charge card, for that matter, or even actually putting it towards a vehicle, for crying out loud.
Yes.
Do better things in that perspective. But it sounds more like a complete joke, for that matter. Now, on to the aspect of the one politician or the one party in the military that made a comment about, that there's a possibility that some other organization or country may go and attack Korea or whatever, which we should come to their aid. That sounded like too much of a leeway in of saying that, if we can get something stirred up here that the U.S. can actually go and hop in and defend that country or whatever. I'm sorry, that was just blatantly in the people's face, if that was actually the case, that they're going to find some way, somehow, of instigating something in order to bring the U.S. into it. And if they do, then they basically blew their own cover by even making that comment, if anybody really caught it to start with.
Well, I caught it, and the first thing I thought of was this suggests that the U.S. plan to get into North Korea, maybe to fire a missile out of a submarine into someplace in South Korea, blame it on North Korea, and start the war before anybody can say, hang on, let's actually see what happened here. Because these false flags, they have to be rushed, because so many people are now aware of false flags and doubt the official story. I remember when they tried to claim North Korea sank a South Korean ship, the Cheosan, and they claimed to have a blueprint of a North Korean torpedo, and they found the remains of a torpedo on the ocean floor, and they put them up together and said, see, it's North Korea. But anybody who actually looked at it realized that the torpedo they'd recovered was not built from those North Korean blueprints. It was in all probability a German design that's manufactured for export. So, yeah, they keep doing these things. And if Trump is really out there sending the message he wants to go into North Korea, then we can expect something imminently. Like I said, over the last week, there's been an awful lot of activity out here at our air base and Pearl Harbor. And I don't know where it went. I'm not in a position to say, and if I actually knew, I wouldn't say it anyway for the obvious reasons. But something is clearly up because the amount of activity is very much elevated.
Well, as of the aspect of something being up, the aspect that there's so many cases of influenza or whatever breaking out in either North or South Korea during a given short period span of time, that's a very challenging scenario that maybe there's some biological warfare going on as is to even stir up garbage up in that area. Now, as for the, on a different note, when I heard that he made a comment about keeping Guantanamo Bay, Cuba open, it's like, excuse me, you want to do what? I mean, what political party in office goes and makes a obscene comment about keeping that place open when it was supposed to have been shut down decades ago?
Yes.
Or, several years ago or whatever? I mean, come on. How much of a fool do you think the everyday person is that we don't remember what in the name of creation happened there? And it's no wonder that there was probably a lot of conditioning and all that to create what they call silent cell or quiet cell operations or domestic terrorism here in the States. Well, guess where you got it from? I mean, let's get realistic. I don't know. My thought has always been reserved about the administration, for that matter, just like with all the other ones preceding this one. I've always had my reserved thoughts about it. I mean, comes across good, sounds great and all that, but you know something? When something is said that's like off-key, why? Is there something else going on the sideline that we're not aware of? Now, as for this thing about the visa memos and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, okay, hang on, Francis. I want to comment on that. I think the reason that Guantanamo is remaining open is not to house new prisoners, which is what Trump implied last night. But I think that some things were done to these captured prisoners, many of whom were innocent of anything at all. And even the military tribunal has cleared a lot of these people for release, and the U.S. government will not release them. And we know from one individual who did get released and went public that worse things were being done to these prisoners than waterboarding, things that left permanent scars. And we all remember those pictures from Abu Ghraib. And so I think Guantanamo is just where they're going to let these people live out their lives. And I don't know how comfortable they are. They probably have TV and, but basically they're an embarrassment. If they go on out and they are seen in public, it basically opens up the U.S. government to more war crimes charges.
Well, that's understanding as far as leaving the U.S. Government open to war crime charges for that matter, because for one thing, those people there cannot possibly be watching TV, having a steak dinner or lobster tail or whatever the case might be, eating caviar and champagne on the side. Let's get realistic here. The people were dragged there or sold off there or whatever the case was just because, we got to fight them over there so we don't find them over here. Excuse me? I mean, there's been so many different organizations from Cheney and Chertoff and all that with their various organizations that have made a killing on imprisoning these people that have done nothing.
Yes.
I mean, it is
and like
nauseating.
It was all about the money. War is big business, and they like to say war is good for the economy. It's good for that part of the economy that's dedicated to mass killings and torture and things that go bang in the night. It's not good for the rest of the economy. It doesn't really create wealth. It just shifts it around out of the pockets of ordinary people and into the pockets of the warmongers. Anyway, listen, Francis. Yeah, I need to let you go because I got another caller waiting on the line who's been sitting very, very patiently. Before I get to him, though, aloha, and we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who just now rejoined our network, and we're going to take a call from Jim in Chicago. Jim, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yesterday when you made the statement about what's going on at Pearl Harbor, it sort of prompted me to do some research. Do you realize 50 years ago, around this time, was when the U.S. Pueblo was captured by North Korea?
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, is this another way of maybe paying back what happened years ago? Or does Trump feel like he has to be very, very macho when it comes to North Korea and other parts of the world?
Well, this is Trump, wanting to be a war president. He campaigned on being a peace president, but obviously now that he's in that Oval Office, it seems like he's never met a war he didn't love. And it's very angering, I think, for most American voters. We keep voting for the candidate who says they're going to end this military adventurism, and it still goes on, which I think is another reminder that the president really isn't the power in this country. It is that deep state back channel cabal, if you will.
Right. To change the subject, with the talk of dreamers and kids that were brought here when they were very young, why is it no one talks about the parents? Why don't they go after the parents? Charge them with something.
Well, I think the idea was that the parents are supposed to be deported, and this whole DACA program was set on up under the theory that you shouldn't punish the child for the parents' crimes. But unfortunately, a lot of the people who are caught up under the protection of DACA, they really don't qualify as children. They're young adults. We had a story the other day about 2 of them who got arrested for human trafficking, which means they're obviously old enough to drive, which means they're obviously old enough to have jobs. They're not really children any longer. And we've seen the same thing in Europe, where the open borders are justified by allowing children from the war-torn areas to come into Europe, but these so-called children turn out to be 20, 30 years old.
Right. Speaking of illegals, did you hear about that semi-truck? They had 76 illegals in that trailer truck, and they captured them, I think, at the border or near the border. Did you read about that?
Yeah, we reported that yesterday.
Okay. Well, Michael, I'm going to let you go. You take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Thank you for the phone call. And getting on back to the news, we were talking about Europe, and we're talking about the very dramatic shifts that we're seeing in the attitudes of the refugee crisis. Now Austria has hang on a second. Excuse me. Austria has a brand new chancellor. He's right-wing, Sebastian Kurz. And he says he's positioning his country as a bridge between the Visegrad group of Eastern European nations and their Western counterparts. And he says, Kurz says he agrees with the Visegrad countries, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, that a quota system for migrants was unworkable and on the need to strengthen the external borders. See, those European leaders who are all in favor of flooding Europe with these refugees, they're all getting voted out of office. So slowly but surely, George Soros' plan for a homogenized Europe is coming undone. Earlier in the show, we had a caller that came up with this idea of every day you get up and you wonder, what nonsense are they going to come up with today? And this is today's. Apparently, there is a religious studies professor named Shrina Gandhi who apparently co-authored an article that appeared in the New York Post saying that white people who practice yoga contribute to white supremacy and the yoga industrial complex, and says the practice is tied up with colonialism. Where can you even get this? And you keep thinking they can't get more absurd than this, but they do. As I mentioned that other caller earlier in the show, France has this law that they're looking at where if you comment on a woman's beauty in public, it's a fine. And apparently they're now expanding that law to include things like asking for her phone number. Now, it's hard to map asking for a phone number to sexual assault of any kind. And of course, the woman obviously can say no, she thinks the guy's a creep. But there's this constant two-pronged attack in which, on one hand, us normal heterosexual men and women are being driven apart and marginalized and treated like there is something wrong with us and we need to be controlled. We need to be legislated against. We need to be discriminated against. While the LGBTQ community is being presented front and center as the new normal. And as I've said many times before, you don't cure injustice by being unjust. You don't end discrimination by discriminating. You develop an attitude of everybody gets along with everybody else, and you stop trying to tell other people how to live their lives. And that's a big part of what's wrong with our society, especially coming from the liberal side. This absolute sense of entitlement to intrude into other people's lives and tell them how to live. And you don't really. Okay? And I don't agree with people who want to try and tell gays not to be gay. And I don't agree with gays who want to tell straights not to be straight. Everybody just sort of pull back on in, live your life, and you don't mess with other people unless they are messing with you. But we have raised a generation of people, of snowflakes, whose entire sense of self-worth is finding things to be offended by, finding behavior in other people to be offended by, and making a big stink about it. It's almost like these people, if they had to go through 24 hours without being offended by something, their heads would implode. And that's a really lousy way to live your life. Now, I had promised I was going to put this story down, but it keeps coming on back. And apparently the police in Las Vegas have finally acknowledged that, yes, there is a second suspect they are looking for in the shooting at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. His name is Douglas Haig. He has a Department of Defense top secret clearance. He's worked for weapons companies specializing in military ammunition. Now, further complicating the situation is apparently the Clark County coroner, John Fudenberg, has failed to turn over the autopsy reports for the victims and Stephen Paddock's autopsy report, despite a court order. He's ignoring the court order, keeping all this stuff hidden. Now, of course, we know the official story was nonsense. We knew it right when it happened. The fact that 2 different windows were broken out on that same floor made it obvious there had to be more than one person. Down in Palm Beach, Florida, there was this sheriff's deputy who was apparently driving at 104 miles per hour, and he crashed into another car, and apparently he was taken to court, and he basically, his excuse to the jury is the other driver was totally distracted and therefore totally at fault. Now, the reason this went to court is this deputy wasn't in a high-speed chase. He wasn't rushing to a crime scene. He was just enjoying the fact that he was speeding. Story out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain, and it makes you wonder what educators are thinking. There's a big stink now because this Forest Lodge Academy in Leicester was allowing these 4-year-old girls to play with anatomically correct male dolls. Now, the dolls are supposed to represent young babies, but they have all the plumbing. And the mother was rather horrified, saying that it really should be up to the parents to sort of introduce this sort of stuff to young people at an appropriate time. And the school's response was they're going to go on using these anatomically correct dolls, at which point the mother has taken her child out of the school. We got to give parents more control over their children's lives. I mean, Hillary Clinton was totally wrong with it takes a village. That was her call to say parents have nothing to say about children. I wholeheartedly disagree. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha America, welcome back to the show here. And, well, we'll fix that later. Okay. Apparently over in Detroit, well, actually this is happening all across the nation. Apparently there's been a huge problem with health care fraud and opioid scams. And apparently 6 Michigan doctors got caught up in this, but more than 400 people across the entire country were part of this. They've been arrested and charged. And basically, authorities are saying that this Michigan doctor and his co-conspirators engaged in illegal kickbacks and billing for medically unnecessary joint injections, drug screenings, and home health services. And they believe that there was some $126 million in fraudulent Medicare billing, and the total take was some $1.3 billion. Now, I know that we are raised with TV shows to think that doctors are just these wonderful humanitarians who would never, ever, 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 ever dream of harming anybody or putting profits ahead of people. But again, starting with the Health Maintenance Organization Act by Richard Nixon, which he did for his good buddies over at Kaiser Permanente, healthcare stopped being about patient health. It stopped being a service, and it started operating as a for-profit enterprise. And it's been that way ever since, and this illustrates it. Now, over in Great Britain, the National Health Service is now instructing doctors to hang rainbow flags around their offices and especially in the waiting rooms in order to make the LGBTQ community feel they're in a safe space, so that they're going to be more willing to discuss the private details of their sex lives to the doctors. Maybe they own stock in the Rainbow Flag Company. All right, let me just fix this real quick, and we are done there. Here's an interesting story. Boy, this is kind of a weird one here. The director of the CDC, Brenda Fitzgerald, has been forced to resign because apparently while she was heading the CDC, she was investing in tobacco stocks. And this is considered a problem because the CDC is tasked with trying to get people to quit smoking. And so it obviously there's a conflict of interest. If the CDC gets people to quit smoking, her investment loses money. So she is now out there, and they're going to get somebody else in there. Apparently there's a new report out saying that 51 million American adults can't fill prescriptions due to costs. And we know drug prices in this country are terrible. And again, Donald Trump did comment on this in last night's State of the Union speech, and he pointed out something that we all know. You can go into any other country and buy these medications for a tiny fraction of what their cost is here in the United States. Why is that? Shouldn't the cost be more or less the same all around the world? We're not talking about a slight difference in price because this pharmacy is in a higher rent district than that pharmacy. We're talking about drugs sold in other countries being sold for 10 or 20 times as much here in the U.S. And we've all heard the stories about companies that will acquire a critical life-saving drug, which has market exclusivity, and they'll crank up the price hundreds of % to the point where it is simply unreachable unless you've got insurance. And Trump is right to say that does need to be fixed. People need to have access to the medications that are going to save their lives. So let's talk a little bit about computers. Apparently YouTube has been caught displaying ads that are using users' computers to mine cryptocurrency. And this is not coming directly from within YouTube. YouTube just wasn't being very careful about the ads they're accepting for display. And it has become a huge, huge problem. And maybe one of the reasons cryptocurrencies are continuing to soar in value, although they took a hit yesterday, is because so many new ones are being poured on in through this criminal endeavor. And I have to be very honest. I deal with this all the time. The online advertising industry is an absolute disaster. The ad agencies, they're abusive. They try and get away with more than you agree to do. They'll routinely, some will plant malware. Malvertising is a huge, huge problem. Anyway, we're going to take another break here for commercials. We'll be back with more news and phone calls, 800-313-9443. We'll be back after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about computers. Before we take this phone call, no matter how I crank down the settings on this YouTube live stream, people are saying it buffers, it resets, it goes back to the beginning, and I think the obvious reality here is that YouTube is trying to censor the show. Again, we're looking at changing systems yet again, going through that whole operation again, to come up with a new streaming service that won't be costing me an arm and a leg and will be a lot more reliable and less censoring than YouTube. All right, let's go to the telephones now. George in Montana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was just calling in to make a comment about the prescription drugs you were talking about, just so that people know the dramatic disparity between prices in the U.S. and in prices in other countries. I'll give you a quick story. A doctor wanted me to try this non-opiate pain med, and I did, and I told him, I said, look, if you want me to stay on this thing, you're going to have to write me a script for Viagra. That's what it does. And he writes the script, 30 pills. I went to the pharmacy, and they said that's $1,750, and I put a $20 bill on the table, and he was laughing. He says, no, it's $1,750. And
30 Viagra?
That's correct.
Whew.
I went on the dark.
Am I glad I don't need that?
Well, I just stopped using the other drug that was causing the problem. But I went on the dark web. You know, on the dark web with Bitcoin, you can get that stuff for less than 50 cents a pill. Look at the disparity, 50 cents versus about $60.
Yeah, that's insane. It's price gouging.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's that wide. The gap is that wide. We're not just paying double, triple, quadruple. It's magnitudes. Okay, that's all I had.
All right, well, thank you very much for the information. We're going to let you go. I remember when Claire and I were living in Washington State, we were living out in North Bend, which was the town that was used as the setting for the TV series Twin Peaks. And every once in a while, we'd just drive up to Vancouver, because Vancouver, British Columbia, is a beautiful city, very clean, very lovely. And we noticed that we could go to the pharmacy there, and first of all, we can buy things over the counter that are forbidden in the United States, like medications with codeine in them. And yeah, we were looking at the prices, and it was just absolutely amazing. I saw the same thing when I was working in Europe back in the 80s. It's just gouging here. All right, getting on back to the computer situation. There's yet another facial mapping technology out there. It's called face-to-face, and this one apparently operates in real time. And the way it works, this technology was invented at Stanford and Nuremberg universities. And basically, you have two TV cameras, or you have a TV camera and a video. And the first camera or video is of somebody that you want to make say something, or make it look like they're saying something that they didn't say. And the second camera is basically looking at some other person's face who's actually going to say and do the facial expressions. And it's very convincing. The video is actually at whatreallyhappened.com. And it's another reason why you cannot trust anything that is being shown on the corporate media. And what's really ironic, many years ago, there was a Arnold Schwarzenegger movie called The Running Man that was set in the future, and one of the story points was that, yeah, they were able to fake defeating the Schwarzenegger character by mapping his face onto somebody else who was then killed on live TV before the commercial break. And here we are. It actually exists now. So got to be very, very careful out there. There's a new malware that is hitting automated teller machines. It's called a jackpotting attack. And apparently it's a combination of malware and an endoscope. Hackers are able to force cash machines to literally dump their entire load of cash out through the slot. And once the machine has been emptied, the malware, known as Plotus D, has handed over complete control to the hackers and displays an out-of-service message. And this week, a memo was leaked from the Secret Service regarding this discovery, saying it's just now showing up here in the United States. It's already been seen in both Europe and Asia. And at this point, I would like to make something very, very clear. Banks like ATM machines because they're less expensive, they think, than human tellers. I know bank customers would rather deal with a teller than an ATM machine. We only go to the ATM machine if the bank is closed. But you can't hack a human teller. You can't plant a virus on them that makes them empty their cash drawer. And that may be one of the ways in which we start to address this tremendous rush toward automation, which is threatening the job market here in the United States, is to remind these corporations that humans have intelligence. Humans are going to be looking out for your business and your company as a means of looking out for their job. They can't be hacked. And if you start calculating in all the financial losses from these jackpotted ATM machines, you may discover they're actually costing more than an equivalent human teller. Just food for thought from the local bankers. Now, apparently Ford is filing a patent for a robotic police car. This is going to be a self-driving car that is going to be incredibly fast, drive itself, and be able to lock onto and follow a vehicle out front. So that will be interesting to see what happens with that one. As the political climate starts to heat up over FISA and other stuff that's going on, we need to remember the Bush family purchased over 100,000 acres of land in Paraguay. It's enough to form their own state. It also happens to sit on the Guarani Aquifer, which is one of the largest remaining sources of fresh water in the world. Now, remember when Daniel Craig took over the role of James Bond? The second film in the series, Quantum of Solace, was all about this group that was buying up aquifers and in order to control the water supply and charge whatever they wanted for it. Remember what the Nestle CEO said. People don't have a natural right to water. It should be acquired and commoditized. The Bush family is certainly in a position to do that. And I would wonder if Paraguay is also someplace without extradition treaties to the United States where the Bushes and the Clintons and all these other people could go to live out the remainder of their lives the way the Nazis went to South America. Or so that story goes here. I think on the next commercial break I'm going to see what the status of extradition with Paraguay is. So let's get back to this Hawaii missile alert because the story keeps changing and it really is getting absurd. This thing should have been over and done with a long time ago. But the story was originally fat finger. Mistake on the computer interface, sent out the alert by mistake, was supposed to be a drill alert, then the real alert went out by mistake. Then we had the story that they couldn't recall the alert without the permission of FEMA. FEMA denies this, of course. Then we have the story that the governor couldn't tweet out a correction for 20 minutes because he'd forgotten the password to his Twitter feed. Then we got the story that the employee who did this was refusing to cooperate with the FCC investigation. That was followed a day later by saying that, yes, the employee is cooperating. And the story now is he intended to send out the alert because apparently there was a drill going on simulating an incoming missile attack And this employee didn't get the memo that this was an unplanned drill, and he thought the state was really under attack, and that's when he hit the button and sent it on out. And they're saying he simply didn't hear the message. The missile attack drill was simply a test. You got to keep hammering that over. People get caught up and excited. They'll miss those messages. Think about Orson Welles' Mercury Theater of the Air presentation of War of the Worlds. And all the people who thought it was real news and the Martians were really attacking, even though every half hour there was a station break that said, you're listening to a theatrical presentation of the Mercury Theater of the Air of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And the people didn't hear it because they were too freaked out. Now, getting on back here into Hawaii, and another reason to maybe not piss off other countries, they've had another missile defense test here in Hawaii, which has failed. And over on Barking Sands on Kauai, we have an installation of what's called Aegis Ashore. It's a test facility. And the idea is basically to take the already developed Aegis tracking, targeting radar system and the standard missiles and use them as shore-based interceptor batteries rather than have to reinvent the wheel all over again, which does make sense. And so we have one of these Aegis Ashore facilities over there on Kauai, and it fired a Standard Missile 3, Block 2A, but it failed to shoot down an incoming dummy missile launched from an aircraft. This was reported on Reuters. And CNN also reported on the failure, citing several administration officials. The Standard Missile is a product of Raytheon Corporation and is used to target intermediate range missiles, and it's being worked on jointly with Japan. Now, that's a very comforting thought for those of us here in Hawaii who just went through that missile drill, that we don't really have a working or workable defense. And for those of you who are history buffs, the Aegis system, a variant called the Aegis CEC for cooperative engagement capability, is what accidentally shot down TWA 800 off of Long Island. Okay, we're going to take a phone call here. Tom in Connecticut. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, when you were making that comment about the Bushes buying up the land in Paraguay, controlling resources, do you remember the storyline of the first Omen movie? Where Thorne...
The first what movie?
Omen, with Gregory Peck.
No, I don't remember that one.
Well, the whole premise was that they sent an incubus to deal with Gregory Peck, was the head of a major worldwide corporation, to bring forth the son of the devil. Ultimately, to let the son of the devil... Oh, the
Omen movie. Okay, yes. I remember that clearly. I loved the music. I absolutely loved the music on that one. Yeah, it was a good movie.
Yeah, but then ultimately, is that Monsanto or any of these Nestle's that want to control the food resource and you know, it's just kind of weird, the food resource or the water resource of the entire world?
Well, large corporations like to create, monopolies, because then they can maximize their profits, which is why in this country there used to be laws to prevent that, to basically keep companies small, keep them in competition with each other, because competition drives up quality and drives down prices, and that's good for the people. Those laws have now gone away because Congress will sell their own mother for $1, and the corporations are now allowed to form monopolies, media monopolies, medical monopolies, water monopolies. There's really nothing to stop them. And once they're able to establish that monopoly, basically the people are paying these sky-high prices like we do for prescription medication. We're paying for water now. Water has been commoditized. Nestle sucks it out from the ground underneath the feet of Californians, puts it in a bottle, and sells it back to the California people. And meanwhile, the tap water coming out of your faucet is now hazardous to drink in most states of this union.
Horrible.
Yes.
Tainted with prescription drugs and any other thing they can't filter out.
Yeah, these are waste treatment plants are not designed to remove chemicals or radioactive isotopes or any of that stuff. And so, The water quality has really deteriorated in this country. I remember when I was a kid, you could drink out of a garden hose. Nobody thought twice about that.
Out of the garden hose. Yep, absolutely. Well, it's weird. I'm wondering where Bezos is going to end up controlling things, too. I mean, Christ, he's got so much capital, he can buy up half the world anyway.
Yes, he can. And Bezos, if you're listening, we could always use a little help over here at whatreallyhappened.com. So thank you. Anything
Take
else,
care.
Tom? All right,
good.
thanks an awful lot for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here. Down in Tasmania, snow is falling on their higher peaks, which is kind of weird because it is summer down there. There's another snowstorm that is heading for New England. Now, this coming Friday is Groundhog Day. And so the concern is that Punxsutawney Phil may be emerging into the snow on Groundhog's Day. And we like to make fun of it. For some reason, I have this aunt that I really, really love. And for some reason, Groundhog Day was like a major holiday for her. And she made a cake every year, and there'd be a frosting groundhog and everything. So I have to remember to call her on Friday. Getting on back here to nature and various other things. Apparently, some of the volcanoes down in Antarctica are starting to kick on up. And Heard Island, somebody was actually there and saw the eruption, got it on film, which is unusual. And people are now being very concerned about Deception Island, which is off the coast of the Antarctic Peninsula, getting ready for a major eruption that could basically create an ash cloud that would encircle the southern hemisphere, interfering with aviation. And there are a lot of volcanoes underneath Antarctica. And there's Mount Erebus is down there as well. But closer to home, apparently scientists are concerned that down on our big island, Mauna Loa is showing persistent signs of volcanic unrest. And seismic events and deformation have been increasing since 2014. I've been watching this myself through the local resources. Now the observatories are over on Mauna Kea, the next one over. But if Mauna Loa were to erupt, it would be a little bit of a problem. Now, people who know that we have erupting volcanoes on the Big Island, that's way down on the southern flank of Mauna Loa. More about that when we come on back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about increasing indications of volcanic activity on one of the Big Island's two main volcanoes, Mauna Loa, which is the peak to the south. At the moment, it's covered with snow, as opposed to Mauna Kea, the peak to the north, where the observatories, all the big astronomical observatories, are located. Now, everybody knows that there are active volcanoes on the Big Island, but usually we're talking about down Kilauea, and Chain of Craters roads and a bunch of craters down on the way down on the southern flank of Mauna Loa. And they've been erupting continuously for 17 years. It's a very thin, free-flowing lava, and it just goes downhill and into the ocean. It's very predictable, which is why they set up a national park. And tourists are encouraged to actually go on out and watch an erupting volcano, which is something to see. Claire and I have done it a few times with family members ourselves. And if you come to Hawaii, it is worth the trip. But remember to take a lot of water because it will dehydrate you. It's very warm there. Closed-toed shoes. And above all, if you see wooden sawhorses with rope and a sign saying, go no further, it's not there for decoration. Because that black lava on the other side of it may look like it's solid, but it's probably just paper thin, and it's still got flowing lava underneath it. And sadly, every year we'll lose about a dozen tourists who want to get a selfie standing on the brave side of the barricades. Please don't do that. Okay? So they're concerned that Mauna Loa might erupt, and that would be at the peak of the mountain. Again, you can look at it in Google Earth. And that, of course, would be an issue because that lava flow might not be so predictable. And it'll be interesting, and if it happens, we'll probably see the smoke from up here on Oahu. Here's a story which tells us again, we've lost our moral compass. Apparently a teenager, Connor Fitzgerald, 19, was arrested last year, and he spent 3 months in jail because the police did not disclose text messages from the alleged victim that proved his innocence. Charges were dropped only last week when it emerged the complainant, who is unfortunately under the law entitled to lifelong anonymity, had sent texts threatening to destroy him. One of the messages said, "I'm not just going to mess up his life, I'm going to ruin it, LOL." So, we have lost our moral compass. There is something wrong with the American people, or with people around the world. They think this kind of stuff is believable. Now, somebody just sent me this document. It's a PDF. I'm going to have to go through it, but apparently it reveals just how much money these large pharmaceutical corporations are making, and they're just raking it in. Let's see. Big Pharma M&A is argued at its all-time high with unprecedented valuations. So yeah, they're getting rich, exploiting the pain and suffering of ordinary people. And I went through that with this one chiropractor with Claire with her back injury, and I'm glad she's getting better. I'm still having to keep her from trying to do things, but she's getting better, and she will be here Friday. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of good stuff to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. Please direct people to Republic Broadcasting and to whatreallyhappened.com. Keep sharing all this stuff about the FISA memo. It's going to be out really soon. The White House Chief of Staff says it's coming on out, and we need to force the corporate media to start reporting on the corruption. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.